In this module, I'll cover navigation objects. In the toolbar across the top of the screen are the various objects that can be created. New routes, new marks, range bearing lines, boundary circles and boundary areas, as well as other objects. We'll start with the simplest object, a new mark. To create a new mark, click the New Mark button. Notice the cursor gets a plus sign next to it. This indicates that where we click on the chart panel is where the mark will be inserted. I'll click here, and notice over on the right hand side in the Properties panel that this mark has properties. A mark is an object, a navigational object, and all objects have properties such as name, color, icon, etc. Right now its name is New Mark. We could change this to something else. Notice as it changes in the Properties panel, it changes on the screen. We could change the icon that goes with it. Make it a triangle. We could create another new mark. Make that one a light. Many objects allow you to put range circles around them. Increase the count to 1, increase the size from 0 to the default quarter of a nautical mile. To enter any other value, simply highlight it, enter the value desired, 500 feet, FT for feet, or 30 meters for meters. Click on the range circle itself and drag it to the desired size. You can move a mark simply by clicking on the mark itself, dragging it to where you'd like it to be, letting go. Back on the General tab, there's a position field for that mark. We're looking at this new mark, the one we just created. And if I click the position field, an edit box opens up, and we could edit this with specific values if we were reading them from a chart, say a fishing guide or something. Maybe this is supposed to be 41.5 instead of 011. So I'll hit 41.5, hit enter, and the mark jumps to the specified location, the defined location. In the lower left-hand corner of the screen is the New button, plus New. Clicking it shows a list of all the icons. Simply selecting an icon and then clicking on the chart inserts that icon. Click again, man overboard symbol, click again, big fish. So it's easy to enter marks. Up in the toolbar on the left-hand side is the Undo key. The Undo key undoes the last action. It's also has a shortcut key of Control-Z. Clicking Undo will undo the fish mark that I just inserted. Clicking it again will undo the man overboard symbol. There's also Redo. Redoes the thing we just undid. So if we happen to accidentally move a mark that we didn't mean to move, just simply clicking the Undo button puts it back to where it was before we moved it. Undo works with all objects, routes, marks, range bearing lines, and so forth. A range bearing line is created with the New Range Bearing Line button. Click that, we get a plus sign again, and now there's going to be two clicks. The first click inserts the origin of the range bearing line. The second click indicates the destination. So now I have a range bearing line across the opening to the ship canal. I'll zoom in so I can see this a little bit better. I really wanted to see how wide is it here, so I didn't place that very well. So I can adjust this by clicking one end of it, moving it where I want, let go, click the other end, move it where I want it to be. You can use those crosshairs to make sure I'm perpendicular to the shipping lane there. Notice the range bearing line has a range and a bearing right there in the middle, 453 feet. If we want that to be a little bit bigger, we could go to More Options, set the text size to larger. Close that. Now it's a little easier to see. You can also move a range bearing line. It will maintain its bearing and range, so that might be a useful tool to use when practicing traditional navigation and plotting things on the screen with Coastal Explorer. We could create another range bearing line from this bulkhead to the breakwater, just to see how wide these areas are. To delete a range bearing line, simply click on it to highlight it on the screen and hit the delete key on the keyboard, or right click and select delete range bearing line. Oops, didn't mean to do that. I'll use the undo key to put it back. There's another form of range bearing line, a range bearing line from boat, available from the new menu, range bearing line from boat. A range bearing line from boat is similar to the first range bearing line, except that the origin is already determined. It's the boat itself. So maybe I want to see how far is my boat from this buoy right here. My boat's off the screen, so I don't really know, but by clicking here, we now get a range bearing line that says I'm about just under 1/4 of a mile from that buoy. If I put my boat in simulated motion and turn around so it's heading down into the ship canal, there we can see my predictor line. Notice that range bearing line is now decreasing. The range bearing line from boat is a dynamic range bearing line. It's being recalculated on the fly. That might be helpful if I'm making an approach to this entrance in low visibility conditions. I'll stop my simulated motion. Next up are boundary circles and boundary areas. I'm going to zoom out so we see a little more detail here. Perhaps we'd like to put something on the chart which would make it easier to see where we don't want to go. Maybe we want to give this mooring buoy a wide berth. That would be a good application for a boundary circle. Click the new boundary circle icon, click on top of the buoy or the area where you want to center this circle, and we now have a boundary circle around that. Notice in the properties panel, doesn't have a name right this minute. Name it. Mooring buoy. And what makes a boundary circle unique is the off-limits designation. Right now, the inside of this boundary circle is set to be off-limits, and that's the way I'd like it to be. So if the vessel enters that boundary circle, it will sound an alarm. We could also set it to be outside, but we want this to be inside. In the range tab, we can adjust the size of the circle, or we could click and just drag it to the size we want it to be. And to make it even more visible on the screen, we could fill it, such as that. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to click and drag my boat over to this boundary circle. And what you'll notice is that an alarm will be sounded when the vessel crosses the circle. Now there the vessel's touching the circle, but it turns out it's the black dot on the vessel that will trigger the alarm. The black dot is where the program thinks the GPS antenna is, the configured position of the GPS antenna that we set back in Configure Vessel Electronics. So if I drag it so that black dot crosses the circle, there we get the alarm, boundary crossed alarm, the yellow banner at the top of the screen. We can dismiss the alert simply by clicking anywhere in the yellow banner. You do not have to click the little X over on the far right hand side. Just click anywhere in the boundary and it turns it off. Another use for a boundary circle would be an anchor alarm. Perhaps we're going to anchor somewhere. I'm going to scroll over here. And perhaps we're going to anchor here off the breakwater. And maybe I will move my boat to where I'm going to anchor, pretty deep. I'll click the new boundary circle. I'll put it around the boat by clicking on the boat. Well, we just crossed the circle, so I'll have to dismiss that alarm. And for an anchor alarm, we don't want the inside of the circle to be off limits. We want the outside to be off limits. So I'll change that to outside. Now that's a pretty big boundary circle, 1/4 nautical mile. I don't have that much anchor road. Matter of fact, I have 200 feet, so the largest that circle would be 400 feet. So I'll change it, and now we have something more appropriate. I'll zoom in so we can see this a little better, and as my boat moves around, I just moved the boundary circle, the anchor circle. That's not what I wanted. Undo. In fact, maybe over here in general, I'll lock it so I can't accidentally move it. And now I'll grab the boat icon and pretend like we're swinging around at anchor, and it's not until the vessel crosses that line, the black dot, that our anchor alarm goes off. I'll dismiss it again just by clicking anywhere in the yellow banner. One thing to note, when using Coastal Explorer for an anchor alarm, Coastal Explorer must remain up and running. The computer cannot be put to sleep. It will not trigger an alarm if the computer is asleep. Boundary areas or boundary lines are similar to boundary circles, except that their shape isn't a circle. Their shape is a polygon. I might want to make this one a little bit smaller. So I'll click on it and make it smaller. And I might want to mark this shallow area at the entrance to the ship canal with a boundary area, as a boundary area. So I click the new boundary line button. I'll draw some lines up here. And I can terminate. Notice up on the upper left hand side it says click on the charts, and then there's a done button up there. So now if I move the cursor up there and click done, it's done. And I now have a boundary area. I might want to give it a name. Shallow area. I might fill it so it's even easier to see. And again, same thing. If the vessel is underway And coming along, whoop, I just crossed out of my anchor alarm, so I'll dismiss that. And as long as the vessel stays outside of that line, it's not going to trigger an alarm. But as soon as it crosses it, oop, boundary crossed alarm. We're in that shallow area, so I'll dismiss it. Put the helm hard over, head back out to the deep water. Oop, we crossed the boundary again, so that triggered another alarm. So we'll turn that off or dismiss that by clicking the yellow banner. But that's a boundary area. The alert gets triggered every time you go across the line. Other objects. Annotations. An annotation is a way of creating an iconless mark. So I'll put one here. I'll give it a name. Shoal Marina. Maybe I'll change the color, make it really obvious. Oop, change the color, make it really obvious. I want it to be red. There we go. So it's a way of just making notes about things. Notice if I put my cursor over top of the text, I get a crosshair, and I can move that anywhere I want. And I get a little line pointing to where the actual point was, but all of the names of these things can be moved. If I come down here to my buoy circle, click it so it's highlighted, notice I get the little crosshairs when I'm looking at the text, hovering over the text, so I could move that away. So if you ever needed to move the label away from the object so you could see what's underneath it. So here's my boat. I'm going to zoom in on my boat. I'm going to turn a little bit, get back underway. Now I'll try another type of object, an event, also accessible from the F5 key. Clicking event inserts a mark, an event mark, at the location of the boat when the button was pushed. Notice there was a shortcut key for that, the F5 key. So if I press F5 again, there's another mark. Press F5 again, there's another mark. Maybe I'm dropping crab pots, or maybe I'm dropping other things of value, sunglasses, winch handles. I'll stop my boat. But an event is an easy way to mark where the boat is at a particular point in time. You can then go back and change the name of it. You can enter notes. Give it a name. Oops. Put an event. Easy way to do it. It's the F5 key on the keyboard. Events can be seen in the ship's log browser. So click on the ship's log tab, go down to events, and there are the events that I entered. Their date and time, their position, and any kind of notes I make about them. The other marks that we created are in the marks browser. Marks, boundary circles, annotations, range bearing lines, boundary areas, and so forth. And when we get to creating routes, we'll see routes in the voyage plan. I'm going to click the Home tab to close this. Clicking the New Route button, again, notice the cursor gets a plus sign. This means that each click of the mouse will insert a waypoint and a route in this case because I'm creating a route. So say I want to create a route out of the marina. I'll start in the marina. There's my first waypoint. I'll move the cursor away. There's the second waypoint, the third waypoint, the fourth waypoint, and I put that across the breakwater on purpose. Now we'll turn out and go past the buoys. If the cursor gets close to the edge of the screen, the program automatically scrolls the chart away. And I can terminate route creation either by moving up there and clicking the Done button on the toolbar, or by double clicking the last waypoint. So I'll double click the last waypoint, or hit the Escape key, but I'll double click. And there I've got a route. In the Properties panel, it shows me it doesn't have a name yet. It does have a length though. It's almost a half a mile. I'll move over this way so I can see what's going on. Give it a name. Marina exit. Waypoint names are assigned numerically at route creation time. And for ETA purposes, sometimes it's helpful to give waypoints names. Not all of them, but some of them. So in this case, maybe I want to rename waypoint number 5. So I click on waypoint number 5, and I'll change the name to be buoy number 2. And maybe I'll make this one waterway. Notice as I change them in the Properties panel, they change on the screen. If I want to move a waypoint, I simply click on it and drag it to where I want it to be. That moves that one over by the buoy. Maybe this one wants to be over here. If I want to insert another waypoint in a route, click on the route, You get the orange insertion point, and now we can click and drag that new waypoint wherever we want it to be. Also notice the beginning and the end of the route have orange lollipops or handles. Simply clicking in the lollipop and holding the mouse button down allows me to add a new waypoint there. Same here, I'll pan the chart and I'll click and I'll add there. If you'd like to add multiple new waypoints to a route, right click on the route and select Add to End of Route. And that puts the program into route creation mode, so it's just going to insert every time you click until you tell it you're done by double clicking the last waypoint. Double clicking a route opens up route details, showing the details of each leg, including the distance, bearing, and time at the planned speed that was entered back in Configure Vessel Electronics, in this case 5 knots. To change the speed of any given leg, simply double click it, enter the value you'd like, 2 knots at the beginning, and notice how I highlighted that and it shows me that part of the route right there. If you'd like to change the speed of all the legs, the options menu on the right hand side has a set speed of all legs option, so you could set them to any other value, set all legs to a single value. Since we're in the Voyage Plan browser looking at this particular route, notice that there's an obstacles tab. Clicking the obstacles tab shows us possible warnings about the route, which are taken from the vector chart database. In this particular route, it's saying that the first couple of legs don't have any problems, but leg 3 does. And if I click on any of the items it's calling out, it will actually show them to me on the chart. There's a beacon, a day mark, shoreline construction, the breakwater in other words, and there's also a land area. So that's the program's way of telling me that's a problem, alerting me to something to be aware of. And the same with going up the next leg. We can adjust the size of this browser by moving that away. We can scroll up and down to see what's there. I'll close that. Another way to go to that is to right click on the route and select Check Route for Obstacles. That takes you directly to that page. Click the Home tab to close that browser. Maybe now I want to correct this, so I'll click there to insert, click and drag, move that there. Now we've got a route going around the breakwater. To delete a waypoint in a route, simply click on it and hit the delete key, or right click over top of it and select Delete Waypoint. I'd hit undo to put that waypoint back that I just accidentally deleted, or perhaps I accidentally drag a route leg someplace, and undo would get rid of that. So we've created navigational objects. We've created a route, some marks, a range bearing line or two, some boundaries, events. Our vessel has left a track behind it, that red line as it's moved around. Where's all this data go? It's stored in what's called a navigational object file, or a voyage plan document. Perhaps you've noticed in the main menu, the first 5 options all look familiar. New, open, save, save as, recent. Those are all standard Windows file commands. They look just like what you'd see in a word processor or a spreadsheet. New creates a brand new, empty navigational object file. I started this demo by clicking New, so we'd have a clean navigational object file to work with. Notice the name showing in the upper left-hand corner, My Routes, with no space in there. That's Coastal Explorer's way of saying it hasn't been told where to save it yet. So all these navigational objects we've created have not been saved yet. Save puts the contents into the currently active file, the name of which is shown in the upper left-hand corner. Again, if it says My Routes, a file name has not been associated with it yet, so if I click Save, it's going to ask me for one. So I'll click Save, and it asks me what I want to call it. It's going to be a navigational object file, and where's it going to go? In the Documents folder. So I'll just call this Demo. Click Save, and notice the name in the corner has changed from My Routes to Demo, because Demo is now the currently active file. I'm going to make a change to this route. I'm going to delete waypoint number 7. Now, if I save, it's not going to ask me where to put it because it already knows the name is Demo, and it will save that, so the new copy of the route has been saved. So the copy of the route has been updated. Save As puts everything, all the routes, marks, and tracks, into a file that you specify the name of. So maybe I want to put this stuff in a different file now, Demo2. Give it a new name. There we go, Demo2. And notice the name in the upper left-hand corner. When you use Save As, you're essentially switching over to that new voyage plan file, that new document. In other words, we had started with a document called Demo, and then I used save as, and I called it demo2. So now we're using demo2. The original file demo is still there, and it remains unchanged since the last time that it was saved, but the new file is now the currently active navigation file. Since we can save new files, or the current file with a new name, it helps to have some sort of a naming scheme. Personally, I use dates. All my data from a cruising season is stored in a file with a name that tells me something about when that happened. So I'll say save as, and I'm going to call it summer 2015. So now it's called summer 2015. If I exit Coastal Explorer right now, select exit, what's going to happen? Notice it asks save changes. Do I want to save changes? Didn't I just save everything? Almost, but for some reason, some way, the program knows that something has changed since the last save operation. Usually it's the vessel track if the vessel's underway, so the track gets updated. So Coastal Explorer is asking about saving the changes again. If I select yes, it'll save all that data and exit the program. If I select no, it won't save the data, it won't save the new data, and it will exit the program. Generally, I tell people to always select yes unless you're absolutely sure you don't want to save the changes. If you've just spent hours creating some route from here to Ketchikan and you say no, all that work is gone and there's no way to get it back. Now in this case, I'm not really going to exit, so I'll hit cancel. We can reopen previous files with the open command. Want to know which file to open? Maybe I want to go back to the demo file. Do I want to save the changes? Sure. We could use the recent command to see the 5 most recent files that have been accessed. Remember, you can always tell the name of the navigational object file in use by looking at the title bar where it says demo. And the last thing for dealing with files, both the Voyage Plan and the Marks browsers have import and export functions. Import is used to import data from other navigational programs or from other Coastal Explorer Voyage Plan documents. The options to import from other programs are grayed out here because this computer doesn't have any of those other programs installed on it. But if it did, it would know where they kept their data and would offer to import that data. If you have a file from another program that you'd like to import, just select some other file on my computer. Select Other File can also be used to import data from another Coastal Explorer Voyage Plan document. Perhaps a fellow cruiser wants to share routes and marks, or you want to include information from a previous voyage plan. Select some other file, click Select File. In this case, maybe I want to use my Summer 2013 actual. This is my data file from my trips of 2013. Select that, click Open, and it imports all the contents of that voyage plan file into the current file. So demo now contains what it had before, what was in demo to begin with, and everything that was in Summer 2013 actual. Marks, boundary circles, annotations, boundary areas. Go look at the voyage plan, many routes, and that sort of stuff. Includes many routes from that trip. Now the other end of this is the export command. You're exporting to Coastal Explorer. Export provides a way to save part of the current document to a new file. It allows exporting selected navigational objects from the currently active voyage plan file. So perhaps I want this route right here because I run this route every year, Shill Shoal to Friday Harbor. So I click it. The program automatically changes the viewing scale so you can see the entire route. Click Export, and you're presented with all the objects in the current navigational object file. If I go down to Routes, eventually I'll find at the very beginning of the routes, and I see that the one route that I had highlighted but right before I hit the export command has a check mark in front of it. I could check other ones if I wanted to, but just by highlighting the one that I want and hitting export, it automatically selects it for you. And I could also add Friday Harbor to Port Townsend if I wanted that one. Click Next, and the program now asks, what would you like to export this to? What do you want to call it? By default, it's going to put it in a Coastal Explorer navigational object file. I could call this Starter Routes. And we can select what type of file to use. And you see the different kinds of files that Coastal Explorer can export to. Navigational object file is the Coastal Explorer default, so if I'm creating this for myself or for some other Coastal Explorer user, I'd stick with that. If I'm attempting to move this to a chart plotter, I'd select GPX. GPX is a fairly standard file format supported by most modern chart plotters. Check with your manufacturer to see if your model supports route transfer via GPX. Give it a name, click Save, and now the selected route or routes has been exported to the specified file. Now you can copy it to a thumb drive or email it, or perhaps use an SD card to transfer it to your chart plotter. I'll open up a Windows Explorer window and go to my Documents folder, and I can see that there is the GPX file that I just exported.